Think back to where we were 1 year ago. Riots in the streets, a contentious presidential election, a vaccine in the distant horizon, and COVID numbers showing no signs of lowering. Graduations were online, summer plans were non-existent, and many of us had yet to be in contact with anyone outside of those with whom we live. We are not out of the woods yet, far from it, but the mood is different than it was 1 year ago. Kids went to camp. We were able to offer Shabbat services in person. People traveled, and the debates we are having about vaccines are not about availability, but whether enough people will avail themselves of what is available. There is no victory lap to be had. 650,000 people died in our country. Hotspots remain in many states and around the globe, and the bottom could drop out at any moment. So I was asked, how do you prepare a sermon in time like this? I must admit that it's not the easiest, but I confess that my sermon structure is usually the same. I always check if there is an anniversary of an event to which I should refer. I think if there is an happening that affected the world that should not be overlooked, and I should address it. And of course, any event that marked me, my family, my community, that has left unforgettable marks. So I have an anniversary, and I have an event that hit the world, and I have an event that hit our community. So let's start. In 4 days, we will commemorate the 20th anniversary of September 11. September 11, 2001 is an inflection point. There was like before the terrorist attacks, and there is life after them. Nearly 3,000 Americans were killed on that clear, sunny morning when 2 hijacked airplanes crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City. Another plowed into the Pentagon, and a 4th was brought down in a crash on a Pennsylvania field by heroic passengers who fought back against terrorists. The shock and horror of September 11 wasn't confined to days or weeks. The attacks cast a long shadow over American life, from which the nation has yet to fully emerge. What was once improbable and nearly unthinkable, a large-scale attack on American soil, became a collective assumption. The terrorists could very well attack again, perhaps with biological or nuclear weapons, and steps must be taken to stop them. Our war on terror began. It changed the way we travel. Surveillance increased. America became safer, but altered. My second point is obvious: the COVID pandemic. Devastation around the world that continues to this very day and will for many months, if not years to come, as poor countries and even wealthy countries, burdened by incompetent leaders without a clue as how to tackle the pandemic, continue to face high death tolls and infection rates, while still trailing terribly behind in vaccination the population. We lost 650,000 Americans, and our lives, economically for many, socially for all, have been altered in a dramatic fashion. Americans are still struck down by our lack of preparation for such an event and our confused response at the beginning. The distrust is still out there as the messaging remains confusing. The one thing that was affirmed is our belief in the brilliance and abilities of our top scientists and medical experts, who turned out incredibly effective vaccines at an unprecedented speed that has saved countless lives, and how most of our leaders rose to the occasion in getting those vaccines into the arms of Americans and anyone who was in our country. We learn, of course, if we didn't understand it already, that the world is now completely interconnected. What happens in one country affects everyone in the world, and the oceans that divide America from the rest of the world are not our saviors anymore. The third point, which keeps us in trauma, is more localized, but the whole country and many in the world watch with sympathy and with empathy, is the horror of the collapse of the Champlain Towers that stole so many lives, many very young, including our own Ilan and Deborah, and has devastated so many families and frightened so many others. Like on September 11 and COVID, we are questioning whether the government, whether leadership may have failed here to identify the problem and act on it. There were so many hints, so many obvious clues. Why were they missed? Like September 11 and COVID, there is the arbitrariness of it. Some people didn't get to work at the towers on 9/11 because trains were late or they overslept. They are alive today. Who was infected and who was not was often inexplicable. Some didn't go home to sleep in Champlain Towers that night. Some slept that night when it wasn't their place of residence. If it had fallen 9 hours later or early, half the building's resident wouldn't have even been there. How does one deal with such randomness? It's mind-blowing. It challenges our ideas of an ordered life, of if I do this, then I should be okay. In one case, people had flown in to attend the funeral. What a mitzvah. They stayed that night in the tower. It turned out to be their funeral. How does one process that? If you ask me to use a single word to define the human role in each of the three events, I will say the following. September 11 is the elimination of the other. COVID resulted in the care for the other. Surfside is the search for the other. 3 ways to live your existence. 1, I eliminate from my life the other, the one who is different. I eliminate what disturbs me, what challenges me, needs to be out. 2, I care for the other because I am part of a society, I'm part of something bigger than myself, and my health is literally in His hands and His mind. His well-being is in my hands. 3, I search for the other because without them I am incomplete. Missing them means I am not myself. The search, the unavoidable search for the other, because without the search, I'm less human. The surfside tragedy had us searching and searching for people in a desperate attempt to save them. A whole community, a whole nation came together to search for the other, the victim. What a powerful lesson. We need to search for each other to be able to live with each other, meaning we need to understand each other, or the society we live in will crumble like those towers and that condominium did. And all the 3 events have something in common. These things don't happen in the modern era. These things don't happen in America, the strongest, most advanced nation in human history. Enemies don't attack us in the homeland. Countries don't lie to the world about a disease that is contagious and causes to die unnecessarily. Buildings don't just fall down because of negligence and ignorance. Not in the 21st century and not in America. Well, my friends, they do happen in the 21st century. And they do happen in America, which means it can happen anywhere. We need to understand, as human beings, as Americans, and as Jews. And there is a way to do this that our tradition teaches us. It's the process of mourning that we all at one time have gone through or will go through. If we fall into distress because of the despair of a 9/11 and a world plagued by terrorism, if we give up because we are so afraid and in disbelief of how COVID disrupted all our lives and the world itself and can't return to normal life, if we are so crushed by the horror and the arbitrariness of the surfside tragedy that we just can't find joy in the present and confidence in the future, then the people who perished in those unanticipated and overwhelming tragedies will not have their memories as a blessing. The memories will drag us down rather than uplift us, and no one wants to be remembered in that way. How do we understand these things? How do we process and internalize them? There is no better place to start than with our high holidays. The experience, the central prayer that has dominated the service for centuries, the Unetane Tokef. You all know the haunting words. On Rosh Hashanah, it is written. On Yom Kippur, it's sealed. How many will pass on? How many will be born? Who will live? Who will die? Who with a long life? Who will come to an untimely end? Who by fire? Who by plague? Who by sword? Who by earthquake? Who will be impoverished and who will be enriched? It's terrifying. It's disturbing. In the past, many editors of Machzorim actually removed the prayer and it wasn't recited, but it made its way back because we came to understand. It's not saying that this one or that one's fate is sealed. It's not saying who will die in a towering inferno in the Twin Towers, who will contract the virus and not survive, or who will by fate end up in the building that night and who by a twist of fate moved out a week ago or wasn't in the building at that fateful moment. What it's saying is, in this imperfect and unredeemed world, these things will happen in the coming year. And some will perish and some will not. Some will suffer while others will thrive. And we have no idea who that will be. That's the point. We have no idea who that will be. Let me share a secret with you. I love high holidays. I love the music. I love the liturgy. Most of all, I love that in good years, so many people are here, multi-generational families, college kids and teens we don't get to see too often. Our community gathers, and that's what I love. But there's one part that haunts me, and I try to put it out of my mind during services. I look out on the crowd, and I know that some of the people here, or in this case, some of the people sharing from home all over the world, will not be here next year. And I have no idea who it will be. Because one year it was my father, and one year it was my mother. In another year, it was my brother-in-law. In another year, it was my uncle. In another year, my friend. I look out on the crowd and I understand the Unetane Tokef perfectly every year. Things will happen that will be sad, that will be tragic. Some families will suffer, some will be in despair, others will celebrate and thrive. And I don't know who. It really has haunted me for many high holidays. But the answer is also in that same prayer that admits to the existence of arbitrariness, accident, evil, death, right along with greatness, genius, amazing successes in the human endeavor. Teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah have the power to transform the harshness of our destiny. In other words, we have in our grasp, in the very nature of the human condition, the capacity to turn sadness into the power of love, to redeem and save, to turn disbelief into a determination to better our lives, the lives of others, our community, our country, our world. Teshuvah, we translate as repentance, but it also means the ability to review what brought us to that moment and to find ways to either prevent or severely limit it from happening again, to see where we went wrong and what we can do better in the future so that others won't have to experience the sadness and despair we did. Tefillah, it means prayer. But what is prayer in Jewish tradition? It's affirming what is important and holy in life and realizing what is not. It is searching into our souls, into our communities, into our policies, and seeing what can be improved, understanding what is true and what's a lie. And finally, tzedakah. It means justice. It means charity. That's what we do. Teshuvah. We dig deep to find what it was that allowed for September 11, COVID, and the collapse of the building to happen. They didn't have to happen. That's painful to say, but they didn't, and there were mistakes and failures. We let our guard down, we got overconfident, we weren't careful enough. Tefillah, we know what is holy and unholy, denying any legitimacy of other people's religious choices and their way of life led to 9/11. Lack of concern for others, overconfidence, and lack of preparation led to COVID being far worse than it ever should have been. And lack of care, lack of responsibility led to surfside. Tzedakah, justice and charity, those who either brought about this disaster intentionally must be brought to justice. Mistake made must be identified and owned up to, not cover up. And actions must be taken to prevent such disasters from either happening or happening to the degree they did this time around. Charity. We must open our hearts, souls, and wallets when people get arbitrarily cut up in these disasters. And most of all, make sure they are never, ever, ever alone. That is how we must respond as a nation, as communities, as human beings. And that is how we must respond as Jews. After September 11, 7,000 American service members died in Afghanistan and Iraq, protecting 330 million fellow Americans from potential terrorist attack at home. Thousands of nurses, doctors, first responders risked their lives taking care of people with COVID, and many of them died. Surfside was overwhelmed with volunteers. Thousands of people coming and going. They beg, stop coming, please. Stop bringing stuff. We have enough. Millions of dollars raised to help. That's the answer, my friends. Certainly for us, and I believe for many other communities. Certainly our American and Jewish communities. The Jew helps. We always do. That's our task. That is our mission. That is what we really do best. I have no idea what role God plays in these disasters. I believe He plays no role. We were granted free will in an imperfect world, and as the Unetane Tokef says, in such a world, bad things happen and good things happen. We work hard to make more good things happen, and we pick ourselves and those directly impacted up when bad things happen. And we work to mitigate the pain and prevent future disasters by learning the lessons and then applying them for the future. And by doing that, only by doing that, do we turn the memories of those who by bad fortune, by the bad luck of the draw, were lost to us into a blessing. And when we do that, God is present. God is healing through his partners. The role God plays is determined by the role we play, for we are his partners. I hope and pray that we can be good partners and in this way bring holiness and healing into our communities and the families who have suffered so much. I started with one anniversary and I will end with another. We commemorated 2 months ago 100 years since the birth of Hannah Senesh, who with her death taught life. Hannah Senesh was a paratrooper trained to rescue Jews during the Holocaust. Captured and killed by the Nazis, she's still a national heroine in Israel. Through her brief but noteworthy life, Senesh became a symbol of idealism and self-sacrifice. Her poems, made famous in part because of her unfortunate death, reveal a woman imbued with hope even in the face of adverse circumstances. I dedicate her words to those killed by intolerance in September 11, to those who died by COVID and those who perished tragically in Surfside. She wrote the following: there are stars whose radiance is visible on earth, though they have long been extinct. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world even though they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. The light, the way for humankind. May all of you and your families, you and your dear ones, may you all be inscribed in the book of life. Amen.